कुर्वन् गीतामृतं ततो लोकत्रयोपकाराय तस्मै कृष्णात्मने नमः. Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our Bhakti Shastri course, Bhagavad Gita. We are doing the third chapter. We have completed till verse 32. So we have discussed, let's look at the chapter overview before we move forward. So this chapter starts, basically the chapter titled Karma Yoga, and that is the focus. So now Krishna is explaining, we are in the fourth section now. Fourth section we completed, the difference between Karma Yoga and Karma Kanda. And now how Karma Yoga elevates, that's what Krishna is talking about in the fifth section, 30 to 35. So Mai Sarvani Karmani, 30th verse, which says that actually offer the fruits of your work to me. So earlier Karma Yoga was just be detached from the work. But now it is not only to be detached from the work, but also to focus oneself on the Supreme Lord. And when one focuses oneself on the Supreme Lord, offering the fruits of the work to the Supreme Lord, then by that one is able to become liberated. And then Krishna says, have faith. So when he says have faith, at that time he gives two verses that if you have faith, then you will be liberated. If a person does not have faith, then that person will, all the efforts will be lost. So sarvagyan vimodhamstam viddhinashtana chetasa. Now Krishna will continue the theme of talking about dovetailing one's nature and doing one's prescribed duty. Let's look at the verse. Sadrishim cheshtate swasyaha prakritir jnanavanapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. So sadrishim cheshtate swasyaha. So here we see Sadrushim. Sadrushim means Sadrushim cheshtate swasyaha. So swasyaha is one's own. Sadrushim is accordingly. Cheshtate. Cheshtate means to act, to try, to act. So everybody will act according to their nature. Prakrutir, who are even jnanavanapi. So prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. So prakritim yanti bhutani means all living beings will act according to their nature. Nigraha is repression. Kim karishyati. What will repression accomplish? What will repression accomplish? So this seems to be a somewhat confusing verse in the Bhagavad Gita. Because generally we all say that we have wrong desires and we have to suppress those wrong desires. And we have to get rid of those wrong desires. So Krishna is telling what will repression accomplish? Nigraha kim karishyati. And he says everybody will act according to their nature. Sadrushim cheshtate swasyaha. And he's saying even jnana will not help one to curb one's nature. One will act according to one's nature. So now what does Krishna mean here by Prakriti? Understanding that is very important. Prakriti here doesn't refer to Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Mohammed. This is not what he's referring to. By Prakriti, he is referring actually to our propensity within the four Varnas. So Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, that cannot be repressed. See, the Vedic philosophy, there are two kinds of urges that come from the contact of the soul with the body. So some urges are to be rejected and some urges are to be dovetailed. So understanding that difference is very important if one is to practice spiritual life properly. So there is Prakriti and there is Vasana. Vasana is an immoral desire. Prakriti is material nature. So material nature and material desire. So material nature is innate to our psychophysical nature. So, and it is harmonizable with dharma. Whereas Vasana is material desire and superficial to our psychophysical nature, and it is not harmonizable with dharma. What does this mean actually? What does it actually mean when we say harmonizable, not harmonizable? For a Brahmana, say a person who is intellectually oriented, for that person to act intellectually is innate, is natural. It is not innate to the soul, but it is innate to the soul when that soul is embodied in a particular body, which has a particular way of functioning. So that is not in any way sinful in itself. On the other hand, vasana are the desires which are generated by kama, krodha, lobha, moha, matsarya. So the Brahminical tendency or the Kshatriya tendency, that is not generated by kama, krodha, lobha, matsarya. That is generated by the contact of the soul with the body, and that is something which is meant to be dovetailed. It is not meant to be suppressed or rejected. Now, of course, anybody from a Brahmana to a Shudra or even an outcast, all these people, they can get infected by kama, krodha, lobha, moha, matsarya. And when they get infected by these anarthas, then they may also develop vasanas. And those vasanas, they will have to decide how to deal with them. So, the different varnas, they all have to regulate, but the regulation level and the regulation method may be different. For generally speaking, a Shudra is considered lower because the Shudra is not so much capable of regulation, of sense control. And because Shudra is not, so it's not that a person is condemned. If a Shudra had to live like a Brahmana, it may seem, oh, Brahmanas were respected so much, and they would practically just live a very comfortable life. Others will give charity and they will just teach, and they don't have to do any hard work. But along with that, Brahmanas have to live a life of cleanliness and purity. And if a Shudra had to live like that, Shudra would be miserable. Why? Because that psychophysical nature is just not suited. So here we are not talking about Brahmana, Shudra by birth, we are talking about by qualities. So therefore, the important point is that it's not that the Shudra cannot become elevated. Shudra can also become elevated gradually by practicing that one's duty within Varanashram. And beyond that, Shudra can also be elevated by the practice of the devotional service. So there's a rapid elevation the Shudras can also do. So, Kiba Vipra Kibanyasi Shudra Kenanai, Ye Krishna Tattva Vetta, say Guru Hai. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu describes, it's in Chaitanya Charitamrita is described that, actually speaking, if a Shudra understands Krishna consciousness, then the Shudra can even become a Guru. If he understands Krishna Tattva, then he is worthy of being called a Guru. Now, there are two significant points here. First is the inner understanding, and the second is the outer position. So, what this verse says is both are possible for a Shudra. That just because the person is born Shudra doesn't mean that the Shudra cannot get spiritual understanding of Krishna Tattva. He can, and if he gets that, then that person should be considered to be as respectable as a Guru. So the point here is that the Varnashram system is based on gradual progression. And if somebody practices devotion, then that's entirely different. And the person can make rapid elevation. So now, when a Shudra becomes a devotee, will that person necessarily give up Shudra activities? Yeah, as far as sometimes Shudras engage in some illicit activities, Shudras pander to their lust, anger, greed, they will not do that. But beyond that, they will practice whatever occupational duties they have. They won't necessarily give them up just because they are devotees. They may continue those duties. So what Krishna is telling over here is that even if a person becomes jnanavan, when a person gets knowledge, still that person will act according to nature. So nature here is not referring to what is impelled by lust, anger, greed. It is referring to the varnashram nature, the varna nature basically. So one will act according to that. And Prabhupada further talks about in the purport of how the Vedic scriptures offer a program for regulating ourselves. So Prabhupada says that there are many so-called spiritualists who outwardly pose as advanced in the science, but inwardly or privately are completely under particular modes of nature which they are unable to suppress. So inwardly or privately, what is the difference between the two? Inwardly means that they don't express it to anyone, and privately means that they express it but in private. That means they have sinful desires which they try to suppress in their hearts, or they try to keep it hidden from public view, and under particular modes of nature which they are unable to suppress. And then Prabhupada says that no one should suddenly give up prescribed duties and become a so-called yogi or transcendental artificially. So, actually speaking, it is better to practice karma yoga. That is what Krishna is telling over here. And ultimately, Krishna will say that karma yoga will lead to culminate in bhakti yoga. So, Prabhupada is talking about bhakti yoga over here. So, it is better to be situated in one's position and act according to one's nature, but offer the fruits of one's work to Krishna and practice devotional service. So, the whole thrust of the verse is that one should act according to one's nature, because one should not try to suppress one's nature. Uh, that will not lead to any good. Now, there are some organizations which actually distort this verse, and they say nigraha kim karishyati, that they make like the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. So the essence of Bhagavad Gita is, we could sarvadharman parityajya manmana bhav. Those other verses are Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita, the 10.8 to 11. Ramacharya says sarvadharman parityajya is its Charan shloka, summit verse of the Gita. So these are the verses that the Acharyas have described as the most important in the Gita. But there are these pseudo-spiritualists, they are materialists in spiritual garb, and they say that the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, the most important one, nigraha kim karishyati. Therefore, there is no need to repress. Whatever be your desire, indulge in that desire. Indulge in that desire. And by indulging in that desire, you will enjoy. And there's a nigraha kim karishyati. So these people are completely misleading everyone. Because we will see just now we can refute this understanding of the Bhagavad Gita in several ways. First and foremost is if we go into the context. Immediately after this, just 2 verses later, in the 36th verse, Arjuna will ask, by what is one impelled to sin? And implied in that is the further question, how can one control that sinful tendency? And then Krishna from 37 to 43 gives an elaborate answer where he describes how one can control that propensity. And essentially what he says there is, one controls by the practice of intelligence and sense control. So sense control internally and intelligence to steer oneself on the spiritual platform. But the whole point is that Krishna says one has to control that sensible propensity. So if this verse were a license or a mandate for unrestricted enjoyment, then why would Arjuna ask a question, by what is one impelled towards sin? Because this verse would then become as a mandate for all kinds of enjoyment, even sinful enjoyment. So why would Arjuna have any apprehension of what causes one sin? And then why would Krishna clearly say that lust is our eternal enemy, nitya vairina? And Krishna will say that control it, kill this lust. Krishna says, Jahi Shatrum Mahabaho, lust is your enemy and conquer over it, Arjuna. Kama Rupam Durasatam, he says in 3.43. So, if you look at the context, this interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, Nigraha Kim Karishyati, as license for unrestricted enjoyment, it is a completely unwarranted statement. It doesn't at all support that interpretation. Further, Nigraha Kim Karishyati, as I said, if we look at the context, it's more talking about the Prakriti. It's talking more about according to our nature we should act. So Arjuna, you have a Kshatriya nature, and trying to act artificially like a sannyasi is not going to work for you. So what will repression accomplish, Arjuna? Therefore, act according to your nature. And even the learned will act according to their nature. So now we wonder, is it possible to transcend such nature entirely? For us, do we need to transcend our nature also, and is it possible to do it? The important point is that we stay engaged in a way that is productive for our devotional service. Productive means productive in the sense that we are internally satisfied, we feel comfortable doing the services that we are doing, and externally we are competent, that we are good at doing a particular service. So if we are doing it that way, then we don't have to bother whether I have to transcend my varna or not. Occasionally, by the course of events in life itself, we will sometimes be thrust into services which we are not comfortable doing. But we are thrust into those services. At that time, we have to fight and we have to control ourselves. So we may have to do those services temporarily, but in general, we search for and find an engagement that we are comfortable with internally and we are competent externally. Sometimes devotees have the idea that doing the thing that I don't like to do, that is surrender. I don't like to do something, so when I do that, then therefore I am proving my surrender to Krishna. Now, generally speaking, it's a mistaken sentiment. No, it's not that we have to prove our surrender to Krishna by making ourselves miserable. Krishna doesn't want us to make us miserable. Krishna actually wants us to be happy. The important point is that we shouldn't identify ourselves with our nature so completely that we think our current material nature is our eternal nature. So that shouldn't happen. So therefore, we have our sadhana. The sadhana is standard, whether a person is, whatever the service person is doing, but the person continues doing sadhana. And that is a standard universal for everyone. But beyond that, we have our specific individual services. And we do those services, and by that, we slowly, steadily advance in spiritual life. Now, beyond this, if we look at the overall picture of today's world, none of us know what is our varna. Some of us most of us generally, we can't just determine our varna by the particular family in which we were born. And even if we were born in that particular family, we don't really have always engagements that are according to our varnashram propensities, according to our traditional varnas. That means sometimes a person may be born in a Brahmanical family, but that person may choose by the peer pressure, by one's own individual ambition, by the social trends, or by financial needs, to become an engineer or a doctor. A person may not be engaged in a Brahmanical way. Sometimes the person may be born in a business family, but that person may choose not to do business but to do something else. So that will vary. So we don't have to assume that this particular thing is my varna. We will have to often go through a process of individual self-discovery. Individual self-discovery means that we talk of self-discovery at one level, that we discover our self as the soul. That is important, no doubt. But there is second self-discovery that is also required, that is our self-discovery. Who am I in terms of what is my psychophysical nature? Yes, I am a soul, but I am a soul in a particular kind of body. And in the body that I am, how can I best serve Krishna? So this is something which each of us has to discover. Now, of course, in today's society, most people work in such a way that I just want some job. I have to earn a living and I need to have some job. So if one is in dire financial straits or one is in some such situation where one requires to do some particular job, and that is okay. But overall, the Vedic culture is that people are engaged according to their propensities. So we may have to individually find out what are our propensities. And even in material life, sometimes people feel that they don't have job satisfaction. That's because they feel that actually my job is not according to my nature. It may be also that they are not getting sufficiently paid, or they have a hostile work environment, uh, or whatever. Other factors can be there. But one factor for absence of job satisfaction can also be that their job is not compatible with their nature. So that will depend on the individual, whether one is having a reasonably good career, whether one will try to change that to work according to one's nature, or whether one will continue according to that and just focus on practicing spiritual life and transcending whatever one's varna is. So today, how things will work out, each of us will have to decide individually. In general, it is not necessary for devotees to focus on trying to discover their varna too much. That will be revealed on its own. We have to, as I said earlier, we have to embark on a journey of individual self-discovery. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to make that our priority and postpone our Krishna consciousness. We focus on practicing Krishna consciousness, and while doing that, we also observe ourselves. And as we keep observing ourselves, by that we learn, how can I best be engaged? So Krishna is saying that we will all have a particular nature, and we act according to that nature. So Nigraha kim karishyati, what will repression accomplish? Now I'll discuss more about this in the next verse also. Indriyasyarthe ragadvesho vyavasthitam tayornavashimagachet tau paripanthino. So indriyasyarthe, So Indriyasya and Indriyasya Arthe. So Indriyasya Arthe refers to sense objects. Senses and sense objects. Raga Dvesho Vyavasthitau. Vyavasthitau means situated inside. What is situated? In between the interaction sense and sense objects. Raga and Dvesha, attachment and aversion, are situated inside that. Tayor Navashamagachet. Don't come under their control, Arjuna. Why? Tauhi asya paripanthino. These are enemies. Raga and Dvesha are enemies. They don't come under their control. Paripanthino. So pantha is path, pari is thieves. Paripanthino is they are thieves on the path. They are robbers who will steal away our spiritual, our spiritual inclinations, our prospects for spiritual advancement, and our capacity to live according to dharma. So Krishna, if we see, immediately after the previous verse says Nigraha kim karishyati. But then immediately in this verse he is saying, Tayor navashamagachet. Don't go completely and don't go under the control. So is this a contradiction? Previous verse is saying, oh, you cannot repress the nature. But then here he is saying that, oh, but don't succumb to the nature also. Don't go in its control. Tayor navashamagachet. But here he is not using the word prakriti. He is using the word, what should we not go under the control of? Raga and Dvesha. Where is Raga and Dvesha situated? It's in senses and the sense objects. So here Krishna is talking not about prakriti, he is talking about vasana. So in the male body and mind, there is situated attraction for the female form. And in the female body and mind, there is attraction to the male form, males in general. So this attraction is there in the senses and the sense objects. Vyavasthitau, it's situated. So what does one have to do? So one has to regulate it. One should not go under the control of it. So there is the arrangement of marriage by which this can be regulated. It can be expressed, but it has to be expressed in regulation. There has to be expression with regulation. If there is no expression, there is repression, then that will not work. That's what the previous verse is saying. And this verse is saying, but there cannot be unregulated expression. So Raga and Dvesha. So what is the Dvesha? So Chakravarti Pad, Baldev Vidyabhushan, the Acharyas in their commentary explain that the conditioned soul wants to enjoy sense gratification. Therefore, if the male is attracted to the females, but if the people find some sadhus who tell them don't engage in sense gratification, then they feel dvesha for them. Why are these people interfering with the sense enjoyment? And they say, I want to go away from them. I want them to get out of my life. I want to go away from them. So what happens like this? Both this raga and this dvesha, they are paripanthi now. So if we succumb to the raga, the attachment, and get carried away by that, or we succumb to the dvesh and go away from devotee association, then what will happen? Paripanthi now. They will steal away our opportunity for spiritual advancement. Now Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport that Prabhupada starts by speaking about Krishna consciousness. Those who are in Krishna consciousness are naturally reluctant to engage in material sense gratifications. Profound statement. So they are naturally reluctant. Actually, most of us, we are naturally eager to engage in sense gratification. As soon as we get an opportunity, we want to engage in sense gratification. So for us in the conditioned stage, hearing and chanting are our prescribed duties. And eating, sleeping, mating, defending, these are our favorite pastimes. We look forward to them. When can I do this? So, but one who's in Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada said, they're naturally reluctant. Why? Because they've experienced a higher happiness, and as compared to that higher happiness, this happiness seems so insignificant. Why should I lose the opportunity for higher happiness by getting entangled in these lower pleasures? So they're naturally reluctant. But those who are not in such consciousness, Prabhupada writes, should follow the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures. And Prabhupada talks about how sex relationship should be regulated to the marriage itself. And then he makes another point. As long as the material body is there, the necessities of the material body are allowed. So, but under rules and regulations. And yet we should not rely upon the control of such allowances. So now, what does it mean? Should not rely upon the control of such allowances? That means if there is a control, okay. That means there is the scripture. For example, there's dharma, and dharma, when there's dharma, say marriage. So one relies on the control of marriage. Yes, now that I'm married, now I won't fall prey to sinful activities. Yes, marriage creates a sort of protection for ourselves, but at the same time, if one doesn't understand that the purpose of marriage is not just sense gratification, the purpose of marriage is for both the people, the male and the female, to come together and serve Krishna. So if that purpose is forgotten, then that marriage itself can become just a fuel, an arrangement that fuels one's sense gratificatory desires. And then what may happen is that the desires may become so great that they may burn away one's intelligence, and one may no longer follow the dharmic restriction also. So Prabhupada says in the purport that just as there can be accidents even on a royal road. So he's referring to royal road as the arrangement provided by Shastra for gradual purification. But even if there is a royal road, there is always the possibility of accident. Similarly, even when one is following the regulative principles, one should not assume that the regulative principles themselves will protect me. Yes, they will offer us a safeguard, but at the same time, we have to recognize what is it that we have to guard against? What is it that we need safety from? And so if we start indulging in that unlimitedly, unrestrictedly, then as this desire start blazing more and more, then the safeguard will no longer guard us. Because it's not that safeguard is incapable of guarding us, but we will no longer want that that guard. We will knock it out. The desires will blaze up so much that they will knock out all the safeguards. And then one may have an accident on the royal road also. That means one may be intending to practice dharma, but one may not be able to practice it. So now here Prabhupada makes an interesting point that sex enjoyment is a necessity for the conditioned soul, and sex enjoyment is allowed under the license of marriage ties. So now the wording is very significant. Is a necessity for whom? It is not a necessity for the soul itself. It is not necessary for the regulated soul. It is a necessity for the conditioned soul. Now what do we mean here by necessity? So is it an absolute universal necessity for everyone? Actually, the word necessity here refers not to a physical necessity. It refers to psychological necessity. It's not that if a person doesn't engage in sex, the person will die. The sex is not a necessity on the level of food or sleep. Food, clothing, shelter, we say these are the necessities. So food, sleep, these are absolute necessities. Water is a necessity. Without water, without food, we can't live. We will die. So it is not that a person without sex, will die without sex. But for most people, it is a necessity in the sense that what is actually a psychological necessity is so irresistible that it is essential. So in that's why generally the renounced order, and the people are few in the society. Not everybody can be renounced, and not everybody needs to be renounced. There is for few people who will renounce the world and they will practice spiritual life, focusing entirely on their vertical relationship with Krishna. And for them, is it not a necessity? Well, if they are purifying themselves, if they are getting satisfaction at the spiritual level, then it is no longer a necessity. Because ultimately what is a necessity is happiness. So if one gets happiness at the spiritual level, one will not need happiness at the material level. But for most people, to experience happiness at the spiritual level in a steady and fulfilling way requires substantial purification, which may not be possible in the initial stage of one's spiritual life. That's why dharmic marriage is what is prescribed for most people. And the renounced order is there for those people who want to focus primarily or exclusively on their relationship with Krishna. Now, Tayorna Ushmagachet. Prabhupada writes that it concludes nicely. The purport says, no one should try to be detached from Krishna consciousness at any stage of life. The whole purpose of detachment from all kinds of sense attachment is ultimately to become situated on the platform of Krishna consciousness. So detachment, sometimes people feel, oh, all my suffering is because of my attachment. No. Actually, our suffering is not because of our attachment. Our suffering is because of our detachment. And how is that possible? Actually, we are all detached from Krishna. We are all parts of Krishna, but we have become detached from Krishna. Mamai vamsho jiva loke. We are all parts of Krishna, but we have become detached. We become separated from Krishna. And because we have become separated from Krishna, that's why we are suffering now. So, we all want to become connected with Krishna. The purpose of bhakti is not primarily to develop detachment. It is to rectify our detachment from Krishna by reviving our attachment to Him. So when we develop attachment to Krishna, then that attachment to Krishna gives us so much satisfaction that our material attachments fall away. So we should not be too much conscious or troubled by our material attachments, even if we have material attachments. Now our focus should be on developing our devotional attachment to Krishna. That is the essential process of bhakti. However much we struggle in our in sadhana, in our standards, sometimes we may struggle, we may fall, and we have to understand that even if we fall, still we have to go on in devotional service. Sometimes after we fall, we may feel guilty. And when you feel guilty, you think, oh, I am good for nothing, I am so fallen, I can't practice spiritual life. And that guilt may eat us up internally. So actually, if you're chanting Hare Krishna, you say, oh, I am so fallen, I can't get purified, I've been chanting for so long, nothing is happening. What is the use? So if we start thinking like this, even guilt could well be a temptation. How can guilt be a temptation? Actually, temptation is not only that which, say, promises material pleasure. Temptation in a broad sense is anything that takes us away from Krishna. So, if with say lust or greed, it takes us away from Krishna by promising pleasure. Oh, you will enjoy. Guilt keeps us away from Krishna by creating a wall between us. Oh, I am so fallen. I can never become purified. Whatever can I do? What is the use? So ultimately, when we feel guilty, we are becoming self-centered. And if we are becoming self-centered, then we are not Krishna-centered. We are not Krishna-conscious. So just as lust makes us self-centered, when we become lusty, when we feel lusty, then what happens is we can think only, oh, I and my enjoyment. So same happens when we feel guilty. So guilt, how should we feel guilt? That means guilt should be used to act as an impetus for moving towards Krishna. So guilt is like a internal immune system. That means whenever we get some infection, then there's fever that comes. So when the fever comes, then we understand that, oh, there is some sickness in the body. Now I have to take some medicine. But if I find that when I feel guilty, at that time I become so disturbed that I think, oh, I'm so sick that the medicine itself is of no use. The feeling of sickness should make us feel the need for the medicine. If the feeling of sickness makes us feel, oh, the medicine is useless, then that feeling of sickness is not actually guilt, it is pseudo guilt. It is pseudo guilt. So, I have written an article on my website about guilt and pseudo guilt elaborately. The essence is that anything that discourages us in the practice of devotional service, that is pratikul to bhakti. That is unfavorable to bhakti and that should be rejected. So even if it feels like guilt, oh, I'm so fallen, I can't practice strictly, what should I do? Just put it aside. Don't bother about it. Let me practice devotional service. We see Bhaktivinoda Thakur talk so many songs about Amara Jivan Sada Pape Rata. He says, oh, my heart is filled with so many sinful desires. I am so sinful. But what is the conclusion of all his songs? Krishna, I take shelter of you. You must deliver me. Apart from you, who can deliver me? You are my only shelter. So all his feelings of being very fallen conclude in a fervent call for Krishna's mercy. He doesn't conclude by saying, oh, I am so hopeless that now I will stop chanting Hare Krishna, now I will give up bhakti, and I will continue in sense gratification. Why I am so fallen? That is never his conclusion. So ultimately, we have to always keep this governing principle for our bhakti. Anukulyasya sankalpa pratikulyasya varjana. That which is favorable accepted, that which is unfavorable rejected. So guilt should act like the way the feelings of sickness which are created by the immune system act impel us towards the medicine. It should not discourage us from taking the medicines. So as sadhakas, now we talked earlier about Prabhupada saying that we should not let ourselves become affected by feelings of helplessness or defeat. That's what it means. That guilt should not overwhelm us so much that we don't know what to do. How should I practice my spiritual life? How do I practice? With determination, with conviction that if I keep practicing, I will become purified. So that's why we shouldn't be too attachment conscious. Because then we think, oh, I succeeded in resisting the temptation. I failed in resisting the temptation. Will I succeed next time? Will I fail next time? Our focus should be on how can I practice my spiritual life? How can I serve Krishna? How can I remember Krishna more? If that is our focus, then our attachments will themselves automatically get subsided. So we focus not on removing darkness, we focus on turning on the light. Krishna Surya Sama Maya hai andhakar. Yaha Krishna tahar nahi maya radhikar. So we focus not on bothering, oh, will there be darkness? Will I fall in the darkness? Will the darkness pervade everywhere and make me blind? No, I think, okay, where is the light? Focus on turning on the light. So if our focus is always on being Krishna conscious, then we will be able to stay free from Maya. Even if we fall down into Maya, we will come out of it. So we should never let anything make us detach from Krishna consciousness. So guilt can make us detach from Krishna consciousness. Because how? Oh, I'm so fallen that I can't practice bhakti. So we become indifferent, we become detached. That shouldn't happen. You always focus on practicing devotional service sincerely and enthusiastically. So now here, Krishna is telling, this, I said regulated expression is the middle way, it's karma yoga. So in karma yoga, Krishna is telling that we should act according to our nature. But at the same time, as sadhakas, we will occasionally have to do things which are not according to our nature. So if we only do the things which we like to do, then we will get a strong sense of doership. And we will never learn to discipline our mind, and so we won't develop taste for the core devotional activities. What do we mean by core devotional activities? Hearing and chanting, these are core devotional activities. And to develop taste in them, we have to discipline ourselves. How do we discipline ourselves? We will learn to discipline ourselves by doing our services. So we do services which are according to our nature. We do sometimes services that are not according to our nature, whenever it's required for. It's not that we have to go and hunt out of our way for services which are not according to our nature. But the point is, we do whatever is required when the situation demands. And by that, we express our surrender. But that doesn't mean that we have to make ourselves miserable in devotional service. And beyond that, yes. So, let's move forward. Now Krishna again comes back to the point that act according to your dharma. Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha paradharmat swanushthitat swadharme nidhanam shreya paradharmo bhayavaha. So Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha. Shreya is better. Swadharma is better. So what is better? Your swadharma is better. And vigunaha. Vigunaha means even if it's faulty, even if it doesn't have guna in it. Viguna is viruddha rupena guna. It has faults in it. Then what is it better than? Paradharmat. Somebody else's dharma. Swa anushtitat. Swa anushtitat means perfectly done. That means you do somebody else's dharma perfectly. Swadharme nidhanam shreya. Nidhanam means destruction. Even destruction in one's own dharma is preferable to paradharmo bhayavaha. That doing another's duty is bhayavaha. It's fearful. It's dangerous. One should not do like this. So it's interesting. Many sections of the Bhagavad Gita have been misappropriated by people who have their own interests and agendas. So for example, I said that there is this organization which recommends unrestricted sense gratification. Their favorite verse is Nigraha Kim Karishyati. So that's 3.33. Here 3.35 is Krishna will talk about exactly similar verse in the 18th chapter also. But here Paradharmo Bhayavaha. So there is in India there is LIC, Life Insurance Corporation. They have taken Yoga Kshemam Vahamyaham. So Yoga Kshemam Vahamyaham. Now the LIC cannot do Yoga Kshemam Vahamyaham. They cannot provide and protect. But they have taken these verses for their own purposes. So different people take different verses for their own purposes like that. But here this was Paradharma Bhayavaha. So these are taken by some Hindu organizations which try to work to get people who are converted In India, especially in South India and Northeast India, there are a huge amount of conversions that are happening. So Christian missionaries are through various means getting people to convert to Christianity. So there are Hindu organizations which feel very agitated. Hindus are getting converted, and they try to get the converted Hindus back into Hinduism. And their initiatives, they call them homecoming. Come back to your original religion. And their slogan is Paradharmo Bhayavaha. Others' dharma is very dangerous. Don't follow that. So now that is uh, complete decontextualized application of this verse. When Krishna is using the word dharma, he is not referring to Christianity or Hinduism or Islam or anything like that at all. In fact, none of these religions were there at the time of the Vedic culture. And Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita, Jesus had not come, Muhammad had not come, and even the word Hindu was not there in the vocabulary. The word Hindu came only maybe a few hundred years ago. So therefore, that is a decontextualized use of the verse. Now, of course, we can say that people who are converted out of the Vedic fold, if they come back to the Vedic fold, that is good. Yes, that is good in the sense that people will at least have appreciation for Vedic culture. Generally speaking, most of the people from religions like Christianity and Islam, these religions are exclusivist. Exclusivist means that they believe that their way is the only way. Now, is that based on their scriptures? Not exactly fully based on the scriptures. These exclusive sort of statements are there in all religions, but they have to be understood in the proper context. So, for example, if some people say Jesus says this is the only way, and no one shall go to the Father except through me. There's one verse which says that. If you go back to the original Hebrew of the verse, we find that there's a word zekel, and that means now, presently. Jesus is not talking about all time of eternity. He's talking presently, I am the way, and none shall go to the Father except through me. But beyond that, in principle, if we look at it, this sort of statements are exclusivist. They are primarily meant to create a sense of focus. Focus means that if a patient is going to a doctor and doctor says, okay, this is your diagnosis, this is the medicine. But the patients are saying, doctor, no, but I went to that doctor and that doctor said that is the problem. And they said that is the medicine. I went to that doctor and the doctor said like this. And then that doctor said like that and that doctor said like that. Our doctor will say, forget whatever doctor told you what. Just do what I am telling you and you will get cured. So, this sort of statement is primarily meant to create focus. It is not an absolute truth. It is not that this doctor thinks that I am the only doctor right and all other doctors are wrong. No, the patient is not at a stage where the patient can systematically get a comparison of all the doctors and what they are saying. That can also be done if required. But the statement as this particular point is the focus. Just do this and you will get cured. So these kind of statements are there in the various religious scriptures sometimes. They are meant to create a sense of focus. But unfortunately, when they are taken as absolute truths and they are imposed on others, then what happens in many of these exclusivist religions, they consider their religion to be the true religion and all other religions to be not just wrong but also false, as things which are taking people away from God. And when they have that idea at other religions, so now we understand that Christ and Krishna are the same God. But many of the Christians, they don't think like that. They think Christ is the true God and Krishna is a false God. And they say that actually when people have to come to the true God, they have to reject the false God. So reject the false God means, if we look at the historical tradition of the biblical religions or the Islamic religions, one of the things that they do whenever they conquer a particular land is they go and destroy the places of worship over there. Because their idea is, oh, these false gods have to be rejected, and then the true God, the worship of the true God will be established. And that's what they often do. So because of that, when people get converted, then they fall prey to this narrow-minded mentality, and they start rejecting whatever they have worshipped in the past. And people may, when they get converted, they may be told to throw away the images that they have, burn the pictures that they have, and they're told to, in this way, reject the forms of worship that they have. So they develop not just they don't only give it up, but they develop antipathy. They develop a negative feeling toward that, hatred towards that. And that is quite unfortunate. That is very undesirable. So in that sense, if people are within the Vedic fold, then they at least have a sympathetic attitude towards spiritual life. That's why when Srila Prabhupada was asked that who is better, Christian following Christianity, Jesus, or even somebody worshipping a Devi or a Devta within the Vedic fold. So Prabhupada said that the person worshipping the Devi or Devta is better. Why is that better? Because that person will have lesser cultural and conceptual barriers in coming to Krishna consciousness. Lesser cultural and conceptual barriers. Why cultural? Because if you look at the culture of the Western religions, it's quite opposite. For example, the in the Vedic culture, the deities are worshipped. In the Abrahamic religions, the deities are desecrated. In the Vedic culture, the understanding that God can manifest through matter is implicit. So, cultural point of view, this is just one example of deities, especially very prominent example, but very important example. And conceptually, the idea that God can manifest through matter and God can make Himself accessible, that is a bit alien to that tradition. There are within Christianity also, there are certain traditions which do accept this point, but they are far and few. So, because there are more cultural and conceptual barriers, so for people who are within the Christian tradition to take up Krishna consciousness, so that's why somebody who's in the Vedic tradition, that person's prospect of coming to Krishna consciousness are greater. So therefore, Prabhupada said it is better. But ultimately, it depends on one's attitude toward the Supreme Lord and one's intention for pure devotion. This should not be taken as a blanket statement that somebody who is a materialistic demigod worshipper is better than somebody who is a very sincere, sincere Christian saint or a sincere Christian practitioner who is trying and aspiring for practicing sincere devotion. So there can be, so the ultimate criteria is not whether the person is within the Vedic fold or outside the Vedic fold. The ultimate criteria is whether the person is aspiring for developing love for God and is advancing on that path of developing love for God. So here what we are talking about is the paradharmo bhayavaha. So what is Krishna talking about over here? That has got nothing to do with these religions. Yes, for even we could say that it is true that paradharma, if somebody who's in the Vedic fold, a Hindu gets converted to Christianity, if that person becomes inimical to Vedic culture, then that would be undesirable. So in that sense, we could say it's paradharma bhayavaha, but it is in this contextual sense. But if you look at the Bhagavad Gita's flow, Bhagavad Gita is not referring to any of these dharmas. Krishna is saying that if a person is a Brahmana, it is better for the person to act as a Brahmana. The person trying to act as a Kshatriya, and even if the person says, I can act as a Kshatriya very well, but they are temporary. The person is going against one's nature, one will not be able to continue that for a long time. So interestingly, Prabhupada quotes in the purport the exceptions. And then he says the exceptions are temporary. Our exceptions are far and few. And the exceptions occur when somebody becomes transcendental. So he gives the example of Parshuram Brahmana acting as Kshatriya, and Vishwamitra Kshatriya acting as a Brahmana. But these are few examples. In general, should act according to our nature. So a Brahmana, according to acting of Brahmanical nature, will become purified. A Kshatriya acting according to Kshatriya nature will become purified. So Arjuna, please act according to Kshatriya nature. That's what Krishna is talking about over here. So now, Krishna is here talking about, primarily about one's material duties. He's not talking about one's spiritual duties. So at this point, Arjuna gets a question. The question that Arjuna gets is, how does one get overcome by these sinful desires? And how can one become free from those sinful desires? So where does the idea of question of sinful desires come in over here? Krishna is telling Arjuna to practice Karma Yoga. Now, Karma Yoga means one has to be able to regulate one's karma. Otherwise, there will not be much yoga. There will be karma kanda or there can be karma also. So, what enables one to practice Karma Yoga, to do yoga part along with the karma part, is one's being significantly nishkam. So, in the previous verse, Krishna has said that these are enemies. Raga, Dvesha, Vyavastha, Indriyasya, Indriyasya Arthe. 3.34 he says that there is situated attraction and aversion, and one should regulate that. Otherwise, one will succumb. So, where is he talking about all this? Where is all this leading to? It is leading all this to question Arjuna's mind actually, yes, we all know that we should do our duties, but there is some passion which prevents us from doing these duties. So Krishna has said there is this attachment and aversion that is situated in the senses and sense objects. So where does it come from? That is the question. So let us look at it now. Arjuna Vacha Atakena Prayuktoyam Papam Charati Purusha Anichanapi Varshneya Baladivani. So Atakena, by what, oh Krishna? Prayuktoyam, by what is one engaged? Papam Charati, Papam Charati. One is engaged in Papa. So Charati means to move, it can mean to graze. Cows graze, charati, and charati means to move around. So one dwells on sin and one moves around in sin. One is moved towards sin. And then he adds something interesting, anichannapi varshneya. One doesn't want to do it, one doesn't desire to do it, and still one feels baladivanyojita, as if by force one is dragged towards the sinful activities. So what is it, Krishna, that makes one act in such a way? Anichannapi varshneya baladivanyojita. What is it that makes one act like this? This is Arjuna's question. So now actually speaking, is it truly anichan? Is it that without our desire we are engaged in sinful activities? Against our desire we are engaged? Not exactly. Actually, when the desire comes, we accept that desire. But other times we may not have that desire. At that time, we accept that desire and that's how we act. But overall, we may not have a desire to act sinfully. But certain temptations come, and that time when the desire comes, the desire just overpowers us. But when the desire overpowers us, at that time, we say yes to the desire. Without we saying yes to that desire, we will not engage in sin. So anichan is one's feeling overall. I don't want to do this. Like an addict may say that I don't want to drink alcohol. Now it is not, but then still the addict may find that, oh, I drank alcohol. I couldn't resist. I was forced. Now when he says forced, what does it mean? It is not that the alcohol bottle developed legs and came out of the alcohol bar and came to the home and opened itself and plopped itself into the mouth. No. What that means is that time that person developed a desire which became irresistible and then the person engaged. So it's anichan means it's like, say, if this is a normal state of consciousness, at the normal state of consciousness we don't want to do it, and that's why it's anichan. But at that particular time, that icchan comes up. So how does that anichan become icchan? How does what is undesirable become suddenly desirable? That is baladivanyojita. It is as if by force. I don't want to do it, but at that time some force comes and drags me down. Baladivanyojita. So how does this happen? This actually is one of the most relevant sections of the Bhagavad Gita in today's times. Now people may not believe in the soul. People may say, well, people may not care about the soul. People may say that we don't believe in God or we don't care about God. That's up to them. In many ways, that's their choice. But what people can't say that we can't care about is how we ourselves are. All of us feel that there is something within us that sabotages us. There are big sports stars. Sometimes they have so much potential to perform, but then they come under the urge of some passion and they do something stupid, and then they become disgraced by that. They regret that, and we see addiction is such a huge problem all over the world. And there are all kinds of addictions. Generally, when we think of addiction, we may think of alcohol addiction, drug addiction, or cigarette addiction. But there are lesser forms of addiction which are also addictive. Also, it means there can be TV addiction, there can be internet addiction, there can be eating addiction. There can be different kinds of addictions, and all these addictions, they take away so much of one's time, one's mental energy, and one is forced to do that activity. One just can't live without it. One becomes so restless, so incapable of doing anything because of the addictions. So what is this force that engages us that forces us to act in particular ways? Now we may say that watching TV is not sinful. Somebody says overeating, that's not sinful. The point is, Krishna is asking specifically about lust over. Arjuna is specifically asking about lust. But the point is that all of us find that there is some kind of enemy within me. Some kind of inimical force which impels me to act against my best interests. And I don't want to act in that way, but at that particular point something comes and it makes me act in the wrong way. So what is that force? Where does it originate from? And how is it to be controlled? So this section 3.37 to 43 is Krishna's answer, and it's one of the most important sections, especially for sadhakas. Just like 2.54 to 72, which was also talking about Siddha Pragya, and that is also important. So like that, this is also more important. And we will discuss that in our next class. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki jai.